All right, welcome everyone to the next in our Global Health Seminar series at the School of Medicine. So my name is Ramnath Subbaraman. I'm the faculty lead for the Global Health Seminar series here. This is sponsored in conjunction with the Global Health Faculty Council, as well as the Center for Global Public Health, and in this case, for this special event in March, by Tufts Global Month. And so I want to extend thanks to our colleagues for supporting that. So this is an ongoing series. The next in the series will be on a structural approach to Palestinian health. So that's next month's event in.
Not so much across the river, at least was my take on it, but I don't know if some of you know.
So we have an outstanding speaker who will be introduced in just a moment. I'd like to hand over for opening remarks to our Vice Provost of Research, Dr. Bernard Arulanandam, who will provide some opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It gives me great pleasure today to welcome Professor Madhukar Pai on behalf of the faculty, staff, and students of Tufts University. So as an immunologist and someone that does microbial research, I can speak personally to the importance of the work from Professor Pai, which focuses on a major pathogen, which is tuberculosis. TB is the second leading infectious cause of death globally, eclipsed only by the recent pandemic and COVID-19. So Professor Pai, throughout his career, has made seminal contributions to several challenges in the fight against global TB. Including advancing the use of better diagnostics.
People like the subcontinental India.
Right.
It just would be, I think, a real plus.
Okay.
Okay. Should I continue? I thought somebody just jumped in. Okay. Elucidating the gaps in the quality of care, and then importantly, I think with a basis of enhancing public-private partnerships to help ensure that every person with this dreadful disease receives care. So in this context, India, which has the world's largest TB epidemic, it's including one third of the world's deaths from TB, has been a particular focus of his investigation and work. Today, however, Professor Pai will be talking about an even larger issue, and the question of how we can form more equitable partnerships when we engage in work globally. And this really resonates closely to the Tufts community, given our foundational work as an institution in civic engagement, right? So too often global health research, clinical care, and capacity building initiatives reflects the past relationships that come out of colonialism in the case of India. And such relationships are not only unequal, but they also can limit really the limit of scientific knowledge and advancement, right? So rethinking, coming up with a new paradigm to create these relationships, to create more equitable partnerships, will require all of us working together. So I really hope that we can take away from Professor Pai's words to heart today and walk away with a new commitment to work on building those global alliances that are one, equitable, two, fair, and three, enhance human health for all of us. With that, I would like to invite Professor Honorine Ward, who is the head of the Global Health Programs at the Tufts University School of Medicine, to formally introduce Dr. Pai. Honorine.
Thank you, Dr. Arulanandam. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Madhukar Pai is a Canada Research Chair in Epidemiology and Global Health at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, and Associate Director of the McGill International TB Center. He did his medical training at Christian Medical College in Vellore, India, and his PhD in epidemiology at UC Berkeley. He is an editor-in-chief of PLOS Global Health and a member of the Royal Society of Canada and a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. The Christian Medical College, or CMC as we call it, in Vellore, India, where Dr. Pai did his medical training, happens to be the same institution where I trained in medicine many years before he did, and where I have collaborated with colleagues there for over 25 years. In fact, Dr. Pai's mentor at CMC, Dr. Jayaprakash Mulyal, was my classmate during medical school and collaborator for many years. So it's wonderful to finally meet you, Dr. Pai. Since this is Global Tufts Month, I'd also like to mention that CMC and Tufts have a long history of collaboration over the past 30 years in global health, research, and education, as well as faculty, postdoctoral, and student exchange. CMC was one of the first international institutions where Tufts medical and public health students participated in global health programs. So it's a real pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Pai, to Tufts today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come to Tufts to speak to us about the important subject of allyship in global health during Global Tufts Month. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, Honorine. Thank you for the very kind invitation and introduction. Thanks, everyone, for braving the weather to come here in person. And thanks to everyone who is online. I want to kind of start by explaining to you the fundamental problem that I think we face in doing global health. And I'm as much caught up in this as you are. I don't see myself as someone who's outside of this framework of how global health is being conceived or done. So I'll start off with probably the biggest conclusion I'll make in this talk. That when we engage in global health research, practice, clinical work, consulting, technical assistance, whatever we call it, I think we have two options. The old model that's rooted in saviorism and which has made global health into a charity case, right? And we saw plenty of that during this pandemic, that Canada will donate vaccines to poorer countries, and we ended up trashing more vaccines than we actually donated, right? So that's the model that is dominant in global health, which is how it was years ago. And this beautiful new book, which I would strongly recommend to all of you, which I'm reading right now. It's called White Saviorism and International Development by Temriz Khan and colleagues, just published this year, is spectacular. Hard book to read, but I think we need to read it. The second option that we have is a model that's based on justice, equity, and rooted in solidarity and allyship. And a book that kind of, for me, brings it home is this book by a Black woman called Nova Reid, called The Good Ally, right? Allyship is increasingly being discussed in the context of anti-racism, but I think allyship also matters a lot in how we approach global health. What's our philosophy towards global health? I think we have a choice. We could approach it with the mindset of saviorism, or we could approach it with the mindset of allyship. And I think the contrast between the two will become clearer to you as we go along. And I will give you examples of what it means to pivot away from the first model towards the second model. And for me, in my career, regardless of where I came from, and you heard that I came from India, you heard that I did my medical training in a small town called Vellore in South India, regardless of where I came from, I have decided that for me, my path in global health will be one of allyship. Why is that? Because I can't see any other path open to me. And that piece that I wrote, which is welcome, all of you are welcome to read it and reflect upon it, was honestly written more for myself than anyone else, right? And I wrote that well over a year ago, and I'm still kind of walking my way through this allyship journey. And I'll give you examples of what I've been trying to do in my own research team, in my own lab, so to speak. But before all of that, I do need to acknowledge my positionality and where I'm approaching this from. What makes me even qualified to talk about these issues? What are the struggles or tensions that I face? So I've written a separate piece of how I see myself as a double agent in global health. Double agent sounds a terrible thing, but double agent in this context is that somebody like me I would reckon someone like Ram, someone like Lakshmi, someone like Honorine. We straddle two worlds, right? I came from India, but I'm now a full professor at a top university in Canada, right? So I at once benefit from this. At the same time, I'm acutely tested every day of my life in this very delicate, cautious journey that we walk. And I know for a fact that Ram has discussed similar tensions with me. I think anyone like me who's a double agent will deal with a set of privileges and instantaneously deal with a set of different sets of challenges. But regardless of where I came from, I begin by acknowledging my privilege today, which puts me in a very powerful, privileged role in the space of TB or global health or whatever I do. And this then, and I reckon that most of you in this room and most of you on this Zoom call are people like me. We are in the global north. We are in some of the most richest countries on planet Earth. And we've had extraordinary privileges, especially during this pandemic, right from early access to vaccines, to medicines, to everything, which a large proportion of the global south is still waiting for, right? And if you begin with acknowledging one's privilege, then the issue of allyship becomes very, very obvious immediately. If you don't start with that place of privilege, then you could easily approach global health through a whole another different lens, right? So wherever we are, start by acknowledging. When I teach global health at McGill, on the first hour of the first day of the class, I start off by telling my students that if they are at McGill, and if they are Canadians, they've already won the life's lottery. In every way, they've won the life's lottery. So if you're a Tufts student, if you're in Boston, I promise you, you have won the life's lottery. You're already in stratospheric levels of power and privilege. That is just absolutely puts you in a whole another orbit when it comes to how powerful and privileged you might be. You may not feel like that today, but I promise you, you are extraordinarily powerful and privileged. So what do we do with that privilege is how we should approach global health. Obviously, if there are people in the Zoom call who are in Global South, this is probably not applying to them. So I'm primarily speaking to people like me here, right? People in this room. So Lancet Global Health recently ran a whole series called What's Wrong with Global Health, right? Which was inspired by a piece that Shea Bimbola and I had written earlier. And we had written a longer piece where we kind of used this elephant graphic to kind of illustrate what we think is problematic with global health. And we're not the only ones. So many people have written about decolonizing global health, challenging the power dynamics of global health. But essentially, the way we framework this is to say, currently, as things stand, global health is dominated by people who are powerful and privileged, i.e. us, right? And that shows up as lack of diversity in some contexts. It shows up as the white gaze, right? Or the whiteness in our approach and how we approach global health. It shows up as racism sometimes. It shows up through coloniality, the structures that were built decades ago that still privilege us, but oppress other countries, right? So each of us, sometimes when we approach and say, what's wrong with global health? It's like we're touching different parts of the elephant. In the end, the elephant is just one big thing. And that is global health is very strongly, firmly, from colonial days till date, is in the hands of the most privileged elite and the powerful. And so if that is the case, and I'm going to show you data very quickly because you've already seen it or because it's already well known and published, we will then ask the question, how can a field that is intrinsically so power asymmetric address health inequities? If the field itself is so inequitable, how will we ever succeed in addressing inequities in any aspect of health? TB, HIV, I don't care what your global surgery, you name it, right? So that then should make us all pause and say, if structurally we are problematic, we will never meet our mission. If that mission is to really make the world a better place in terms of reducing health inequities. So here is some data to kind of tell you why I believe that global health is so firmly in the hands of the powerful and the privileged. Just take a look at the amount of wealth concentration that has happened in the last few decades. A handful of men pretty much own as much wealth as 50% of the world's population. This is staggering by any metric. And this concentration of wealth in the richest nations, in a handful of people in these richest nations, makes the world extraordinarily inequitable from an economic perspective. And this, no surprise, then shows up in how we approach global health. We will be the first ones to procure vaccines. We will be the first ones to hoard supplies. We will be the first one to amass all the medicines and technology and know-how, and then we have it in an iron fist that we are unwilling to share with the rest of the world, even in the midst of a one-in-a-century global crisis, right? Look at the distribution of COVID vaccines. Look at the distribution of Mpox vaccines. It doesn't matter what you look at Paxlovid distribution, you will get a similar image. You look at the distribution of antiretroviral therapy in the early days of the HIV epidemic, you will get a similar image. It's like the most powerful groups have cornered the entire market on all aspects, all technologies relating to global health. And everybody else has to wait for decades sometimes to get access to the same, right? That's like a dominant pattern across global health. Take a look at where the global health organizations are headquartered globally, right? Out of nearly 200 global health organizations, 85% are headquartered in Europe and North America. And within North America, you narrow it down, United States, UK would be the most dominant countries in global health, right? If these countries don't get behind something, nothing pretty much moves in the area of global health, right? These countries have to bless an initiative before it can even take off. That's the level of influence that these countries have in global health. Who runs these organizations? PEPFAR, Global Fund, WHO, UNAIDS, UNITAID, you name it, all of them put together. Well, out of every 20 CEOs or directors or leaders of these organizations, 17 are nationals of high-income countries, 14 are men. So mostly it's older men who run global health. That's the reality of global health. Older men who are primarily based in high-income countries. And then if you look at the board composition of these 200 organizations, which is more than 2,000 board seats, the board of Gates Foundation, the board of Wellcome Trust, the board of Global Fund, you end up with this skewed picture that 75% of the board seats are held by nationals of high-income countries, people like you and I, and only 2.5% are held by nationals of low and middle-income countries. And these are organizations that are dedicated to global health, that are all supposed to be working on health inequities in global health. This is the level of skewness that you see structurally built into global health. Look at the global health monies goes. Ram and I were just discussing an hour ago, right? Funding dictates so much of what we see happen in global health. Look at the Fogarty funds, look at Wellcome Trust, look at USAID, look at Gates Foundation. 70 to 80% of all the monies given out by these massive organizations are primarily given to organizations and individuals in the same countries, right? So most of USAID money will go to US aid contractors in the United States. You can even narrow it down to an area in Washington, DC, where much of the USAID money will go to, right? That's how it works out. And look at that staggering statistic at the bottom. Only 1% of all the money intended to end poverty, which is official development aid or international assistance and humanitarian assistance combined, goes directly to the extreme poor. The money flows through people like us and will have to eventually trickle down to where it has to go, because that's where the needs and the demands are. What about editing and publishing? As an editor, I will tell you, that global health journals are extraordinarily non-diverse. Most global health journals are edited by people in the highest income countries, primarily men. And the same thing is shown in publishing. Authors in low and middle income countries, if they are on the paper at all, are usually middle authors. Neither the lead author, neither the senior author, they're stuck somewhere in between. And there are so many publications on this. None of what I'm saying is my opinion. These are plain, brutal, honest facts about how unequal global health today is. Then let's talk a little bit about this visa apartheid, right? We know a lot about the vaccine apartheid. Right now, it is so challenging. I mean, it's always been challenging. Let me put it that way, because I know the brutal experience of being denied a visa to come to this country when I was a young trainee in India. My visa was denied like in 5 seconds. But today, conference after conference held in the global north, our colleagues, especially Black colleagues in Africa, are struggling to even get an appointment for a visa. Right now, if you hosted a global health conference in Boston and you wanted to invite your colleagues and collaborators from the Africa region, they will not even get an appointment at the US consulate until 2024. Canada has been a disaster for visas. We held the AIDS conference in Montreal, my city, last year. It was a complete disaster. Many, many African colleagues could not get a visa to come to Canada. And in this context, if we host a global health meeting in the global north, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? Who are these meetings for? Right? Who are we centering on and what message are we sending to our colleagues in the global south? That if you're not in the room, it's fine with us. Right? That's the message we are sending. And they are being humiliated by our country governments. This is how unequal the world is. So before anybody asks me, and I know some of you will ask me this question, is it still not the elite and the privileged within a low and middle income country who is also running global health? The answer is yes. So whatever global north-south power relationships or dynamics that we see is also played out within a country. So here is a lovely paper from published in BMJ Global Health. And they say most scholars construct the issue of decolonization in terms of the binary of global south, global north and versus south. But they're saying the conversation on decolonization is not helpful if it does not examine how colonial power interacted with the power of in-country elites, right? The most elite people within those nations, both in collusion with it and in opposition to it, to ultimately preserve the privileged position of the elites and often to the detriment of public health. So for example, in India, you have to understand caste dynamics to understand how it privileges the most privileged people within the Indian context. So it's no surprise, having shown you all the data, that there's been scores of meetings and calls on decolonizing global health. It's become like a buzzword now, right? Every school of public health is having conversations, courses, meetings, webinars, symposia, so on and so forth. And Ram asked me, so what do you think of this movement, right? And I will tell you what I think of this movement. But for now, it's almost like impossible to avoid this if you're working in global health, right? It is in your face. And it's also unsurprising in many ways that in the last few years, there's been report after report after report. It's staggering on how many global health organizations are structurally problematic, right? All of you have seen the report that London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine is structurally problematic. Liverpool School is problematic. Wellcome Trust publishes a report saying that we are structurally racist. MSF publishes a report saying that we are structurally racist. UN has a whole host of problems. WHO has been held accountable for sexism and sexual harassment of people in DRC. I mean, what gives? How is it that some of the biggest global health organizations are found to be structurally problematic? How does a Nobel Prize winning organization like MSF end up with this situation? right? Shouldn't it give us pause and say, what is wrong with global health organizations if report after report is finding them to be structurally challenged, right? So comes the question, is it possible to save global health, right? Is there any hope for a field that is so deeply power imbalanced from colonial days till today, right? One of the biggest mistakes I think we all make when we teach global health is that we say, yes, global health started with colonial medicine, missionary medicine, tropical medicine, and whatnot. And then we come to present day and we somehow think that none of that applies today, right? But I argue, and I will hope convince you with the data that I've shown you, all the data I've shown you is current. This is not a historic data that I'm presenting for you. I'm presenting to you the global health architecture as it stands in 2023, right? How do we end up with something like this, right? I was invited to come and give a talk on decolonizing global health at the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, a conference that will happen in Chicago. Think hard about what that means to have a tropical diseases conference in Chicago in the year 2023. What does it even tell us about how global health architecture is currently visioned? They had a tropical medicine conference in Toronto, for Christ's sakes. I don't even know what that means, right? We've forgotten how to even challenge these structures because we're so part of this, right? I'm caught up in it as much as you are, right? And we have to really pause and say, if this is how power asymmetric our field is, will we ever meet our mission, right? Will we ever succeed in addressing health inequities? So I humbly propose to you that the path forward to us is to abandon the first model that we are so deeply rooted in and are genuinely caught up in, right? And that model of saviorism to one of allyship, okay? Now, in case these two words are scary and not clear to you, I will break it down because I myself needed to go through this process of learning, right? So this is how I'm seeing it now. And I use this graphic a lot and I keep changing it every few weeks to keep in touch with what I'm learning, right? You see two columns here. The first column is the old model, right? And it's the model that you and I have been taught. It's the model that I argue that most public health, global health students are still being taught, even in 2023. And this is how the global north likes to see it. This is our preferred model. It makes us happy, right? It gives us control. And that model says global health is charity, about philanthropy. It's about aid. It's about donating things, right? Things that we don't want or don't need anymore. It's about development assistance. It's about saviorism. It's about keeping other nations dependent on us because it gives us control and power, right? It gives us enormous control to be able to say, if you don't play ball, then we will not give you aid, right? If you don't follow the global gag rule, thou shall not get USAID money, right? That is power, enormous power in our hands, right? And every country uses that power, right? This is the typical traditional global health model that is persisted on, that we saw so beautifully during this pandemic. How we approached the pandemic illustrates to you that we are still in this model. We come first. We will have the first shot at vaccines. We will hoard Paxlovid. We will donate to you when we are ready to donate to you. Until then, you wait, right? That's the model. And please don't tell me that this model isn't a lie, because you've seen 50 indications during this 3 years that that's the way the model works, right? The second model, which I believe is exactly what our colleagues in Global South are telling us. If you listen to them, this is what they're telling you every day, not just subtly. They're saying it clearly, right? And they're saying, we don't want your charity. You keep your charity to yourself. We just want to be allowed to do whatever we need to save our nations. our populations. We want it to be seen as a matter of human right, right? If health is a human right, how can a COVID vaccine not to be seen as a human right, right? We don't want your vaccine charity. We want it to be given to us as a fundamental human right, right? Equity and social justice. They're saying we need reparations for the damages that have been done to us. And the reparations have come up a lot in climate change, hasn't it? The Loss and Damage Fund is a reparations from the global north countries, which account for the gigantic share of carbon emissions, as a way to support countries that are getting hammered in this crisis, right? Autonomy and respect. They're saying we have agency. We don't need you to tell us how to tackle COVID or malaria or whatever. We have deep knowledge of these problems because we are suffering from them every day, right? And then they're saying we want to be self-determining our agenda, and then we want to be self-sustained. We don't want to be reliant on charity anymore. And this has come up in so many fora. I was in Kenya recently, and I was invited to be the only non-Black person on this panel on anti-Blackness and global health. I have to tell you, I felt extraordinarily uncomfortable because they were unsparing of their criticism. Oh, you should watch that 2-hour or 1-hour recording. It is brutal. And they went ahead and wrote a piece on anti-Blackness in global health. By that, they mean every single pandemic, every single problem, Black Africans have been at the bottom of the list. They are the last ones to be prioritized in this world, right? We saw, I mean, look at something like Mpox. How do you and I walk into a clinic and get a Mpox shot here when the entire African continent did not have a single dose? How do you explain this to anyone in 2022, right? 2023. Even today, when the dust is settled, not even 1 in 4 Africans has received 2 shots of the COVID vaccine. Forget boosters, forget Omicron boosters, forget all of that. We're not even there yet, right? The entire continent has had no access to Paxlovid. This is like almost a predictable pattern that from the days of HIV, where we said, oh, Africans can't even tell the time, they can't take the ARVs, right? To today, we see the same patterns echo. And they are connecting the dots together and saying there is only one explanation when it happens again and again and again, that this is structurally anti-Black, right? It is designed to be like this. And so they're saying people and organizations in the global north, like us, must humbly listen to African experts, cede space, power, and resources, and be supportive of the vision for a new public health order in Africa. At a minimum, look at this line. At a minimum, partners in high-income nations must not obstruct this vision for self-determination. And so many African leaders have written pieces saying, we as an African region are screwed if you're going to wait for charity to come and save us. We got to save ourselves because we have seen nobody's coming to save us, right? That agenda to be self-sufficient and self-determining their own agenda is now a dominant theme. If you've gone to any of the recent Africa-based conferences by Africa CDC, Africa Union, this is what they're trying to tell us. Not subtly, they are trying to tell us with their words every single day. And so, if I had to contrast the difference between saviorism and allyship, here is one single graphic which kind of illustrates that. A savior is a person who's out to rescue someone, right? Often without consent. So you've all seen stories of white people going to the middle of nowhere in Uganda and starting a medical clinic with no medical training, right? No consent. You just go there and do what you want to do, right? It consistently elevates whiteness. Our feelings as saviors matter more than the people with whom we are supposed to be working. And a savior works on behalf of a population rather than works with the population. Centers saviors and validates the privilege and undermines the agencies of the communities that we are supposedly helping, right? An ally works in solidarity with an oppressed group to dismantle the system of oppression, whatever that might be. With consent, you have to be invited into that space to be an ally, elevates the oppressed groups, works alongside, consistently center the needs of others. In fact, a good ally will be almost invisible. They are there silently working away at the background, but not at the front, not taking up space, and consistently amplifies the voices of people who they're supposed to be working in solidarity with. And it is built on respect and respect for the agency of the people that they're working with. So I won't spend much time on it. I will let you read this amazing book by Tim Rees and others. But I just want to say, this is an important thing. White saviorism is not just about white people. I, as a brown person, as someone who immigrated from India, can easily approach my global health work with the lens of white saviorism. All of us are capable of having that white saviorism mindset. That's why they're saying white saviorism is simultaneously a state of mind, as well as a concrete, unequal power structure between the global north and the global south. So it's both. It's the structural problem that I showed you, but also it's the way we approach our global health work on a daily basis. So what underpins white saviorism? Here is a striking quote from this book. White saviorism reduces problems faced by many Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities as quote unquote easily solvable compared to those of predominantly white communities. To be white is considered an expert, qualified, and believed beyond a reasonable doubt in the global system of white supremacy. And this is very, very interesting to see. If you're a white student and you walk into a rural community in Uganda or Vietnam or whatever, instantaneously, people there judge you as an expert. You may not even have, past second year of your MD program, but you're still seen as an expert. That's the way the system consistently elevates whiteness, right? And why is white saviorism harmful? Well, this is a very, very important quote. While it ends up alleviating poverty on the margins, it undermines the struggle of global South people to emancipate themselves from economic, social, and political oppression, and often reinforces the capitalistic heteropatriarchal system. So when they say, we don't want your charity anymore, we want to make our own vaccines and medicines, essentially they're saying, we don't want to be put in this bad place again in future. We want to liberate ourselves from being dependent on anyone for that matter. And that is how white saviorism, by consistently saying, just wait for our donation, you'll be okay, we're preventing them from enacting the liberation that they want to see in the system they're working with. Allyship, on the other hand, is genuinely a difficult and very arduous process. We may have to unlearn a lot of the things that we thought was obvious and consistently reevaluate our position and work to share our privilege and power in solidarity with the group that we care about, whatever that oppressed group might be. Might be Black people, might be women, might be colleagues in the global South, whichever group that you care with and working with solidarity with. Again, these are very important insights from the Anti-Oppression Network. They remind us that allyship is not a noun, it's a verb. We consistently work on it every day of our life. We can't take a break from it. If you want to be an ally, you show up and do the constant work required to be an ally. And it is not self-defined. We don't go around calling ourselves ally. One day, if we do good work, whoever that we are working with will say, oh, this is a good person. This is an ally that we trust, right? It's not about acting out of guilt. It's definitely not about saving, and is most certainly not about getting a medal. In fact, that book, The Good Ally, the author says, if you've read my book and you're expecting a medal or a citation, you've come to the wrong place, right? Allyship is never about say, hey, I've done my job, I am an ally. That puts us in the role of a performative ally, someone who is just showing off, but not really doing the hard work required to be an ally. So I have used this intersectional lens, and I love this power and privilege wheel. I was actually pretty stunned when I did this exercise myself. I've gone through something like 8 hours of organized, structured training in anti-oppression, anti-racism, and allyship. And every time I've been asked to do this kind of power and privilege wheel where you check yourself and you see whether you are close to the center of the wheel, which puts you in a very privileged position, or in the periphery of the wheel, which puts you in a position of oppression, I'm just blown away, except for not being white. I pretty much check off every box there is, which is what made me wake up to my enormous power and privilege, right? Except for being not white and perhaps being an immigrant, I pretty much check off every box. So from that intersectional lens, who can be an ally to who? White people in global health must be allies to BIPOC. Very clear. Global North folks, all of us, must be allies to global South folks. Men like me must be allies to women. Why? Because men dominate global health right now. White women must be allies to BIPOC women. Cis heterosexual folks must be allies to LGBTQ. And the list never ends, because that's what intersectionality is about. You will always find a dimension in which someone is simultaneously oppressed and simultaneously privileged. So, last bit of helpful advice from the authors of this book. If you truly want to walk away from the white savior mindset to one of allyship, number one, listen. When we go into global health settings, low and middle income countries, or any kind of underprivileged setting, we stop listening and we start talking. We think we know it, right? I am the biggest expert on TB, you listen to me, right? This requires us to just shut up and just listen. Humbly listen to people who are actually suffering and dying of TB or dealing with TB every day. Move away from charity to actualizing justice. Work with, not for, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. Humility, such an important trait to inculcate in our young people who enter the field of global health. You might be a Harvard student, you might be a Tufts student, but you go and approach this with great humility, right? And create space for dismantling barriers, listening to the perspective of brown and Black scholars, leaders, activists, and communities. So I want to end by giving you a few concrete examples, because every time I've given this talk, people get depressed. And I do have people asking me, okay, so we do happen to be privileged. Is there no role for us in global health? Is that what you're saying? Well, that's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying there is a massive role for us in global health, provided we approach global health as through the lens of allyship, right? If we walk that path, there is tremendous good that I think we can all do. And it makes it easier if you actually see concrete examples of allyship in action, right? Here is the first wonderful example during this pandemic. Some of us, I don't know about you, I, for one, relentlessly pleaded with my government, Canadian government, to do the right thing. Donate the damn vaccines. In the end, we wasted millions of doses. Simply did not show up as allies. I was called to speak to the Canadian Parliament. I've written letters to the Prime Minister, the Development Minister, signatures campaign. We did 50 things. In the end, nothing worked. Okay, but we fought hard. We said Canada should back the TRIPS IP waiver. Why? Because that's how you make other countries and empower them to make their own products. We do not want the African region ever to rely on us anymore. If they want to make their mRNA vaccine, so be it. The whole world is safer for it, right? If they want to make Paxlovid, let them do it, because the whole world is safer for it. But in the end, all of this failed, right? The global north, with a few pharma companies, have just dominated this. Even today, pharma companies have made billions of dollars in profits with public taxpayer dollars. All of you in this room, you funded Moderna with your hard-earned taxpayer dollars, and that company has walked away with billions of dollars of profit, right? How do you not worry about this model? And will it not happen if there was another pandemic? We will behave exactly the way we did this time. I don't see anything changing unless we change the structures that underpin global health, right? That's why the TRIPS IP waiver was critical. And the world failed to enact what was the most common sense solution in a global crisis. Look at this whole advocacy for conference equity. After the disaster in the AIDS conference in Montreal, so many of us essentially pilloried International AIDS Society. And we were delighted when they announced they're going to rotate the conference, one in the global north, one in the global south in the coming years, right? That's how you make sure you don't have the disaster of Montreal all over again. Men like me, this is about male allyship, right? There's going to be a report from Women in Global Health later this week with very sobering conclusions that women are still not in positions of leadership in global health. So what can men in global health do to lean out and create space? Sometimes we just have to get out of the room. Sometimes we have to pass the mic. Sometimes we have to get the, hand the chair over to somebody else, right? That's male allyship in action. Editors like me have a massive role to play in global health. Having shown you what I showed you earlier, we consistently make sure this journal that I'm privileged to edit, along with my fellow editor-in-chief, who's based in Kenya, a Black woman, Catherine Kibutunji, we are intentionally doing everything the opposite of what a traditional global health journal has done. We have recruited record numbers of women and people in the global south to make sure we don't end up making the same mistakes that every global health journal has done. It's a work in progress, but we're heading in the right direction because we've been intentional about it. Without intentionality, this journal would have ended up like any other journal, right? In fact, when we opened it to anyone to apply for an editor position, it was mostly men in the global north that applied. This tells you that if you just allow the forces to be, global health ends up in the hands of the most powerful and the privileged. Equity in authorship. So many people have come up with important statements on ending parachute research. Look at PLOS Medicine. I was pretty pleased to see that. As part of PLOS Medicine's commitment to address parachute research, we now require that local researchers be the first or last authors of publications based on global research. And this is exactly what I've been trying to do in my own team. Look at all of these papers, and there's many more that I have not put on this slide. You can tell, you don't know it, but I will tell you that the first authors are all my trainees because it was their thesis, PhD, masters. But you can see, I'm not the senior author on any of them, right? It's my collaborator in whichever country that they've worked in who's the senior corresponding author on the paper, right? This is an intentional, deliberate effort. I'm pretty much never a senior author on any of my students' papers anymore. And the first two authors now are joint first authors. My student and a lead investigator in Peru or India or South Africa is a joint first author. The senior author is from India or Peru or wherever they're working in. This has taken me a decade to get to this point. But this is breaking away from the tradition that they will always be stuck in the middle, right? To actively know and change that reality. Global health partnerships need to be equitable. Your Dean for Research just mentioned it. That is very important to Tufts, and I enjoy seeing that. This is a lovely paper published recently on what it would mean at the design stage of the partnership, the implementation stage of the partnership, and the analysis and dissemination stage. Global funders, something that Ram and I were discussing earlier. If funders directly funded groups in the global south, global health architecture will change dramatically, right? And this is a nice paper by Jessica Haberer and Jaap Boom, just published in the New England Journal this year, on where they are advocating that NIH should give the same indirect costs to global south organizations as they give to American institutions, right? So there are people who are constantly pushing the global health funders to do better. Right now, the current models are not working out, right? So we have to push the funders to do better. And lastly, structural organizational change. So here is Anu Kumar. She wrote a piece on white supremacy in global health years ago. And she said, having understood the problem, I need to change. So her organization, a reproductive organization called IPASS, they have devolved power away from their American office to their country offices. True devolution and power and decentralization, and making sure everything is not decided by the United States or wherever it's headquartered in the global north, is how you structurally change global health. Moving money directly to global south institutions and devolving power away from Seattle, New York, or Boston is another way to think about it. So lastly, this is a very nice framework of thinking about allyship, right? So this is an indigenous elder who said, if you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. That's saviorism, right? You've come to save me, right? But if you've come because your liberation is somehow bound up with mine, then let's work together. This is exactly what we said for the last 3 years, right? Nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Otherwise, this pandemic keeps going on and on and on. There's no end to it because you've left 2.3 billion people unvaccinated, right? The same logic applies. Nobody is free until everybody is free, right? So this liberation ideology essentially binds our fate with our colleagues in the global south, that if they are suffering, we can never truly be happy, right? So at some point, global health needs to wake up and say, we cannot protect just the richest nations in this world. There is no such thing. Global health security cannot be a buzzword for just walling off one part of the world and protecting the rich nations from exotic pathogens that can come from poor countries. That's currently how global health security is being seen as, right? Global health security is all about, can we keep US safe? Can we keep Canada safe? And it will always fail, because when you leave 80% of the world's population unprotected, there is no such thing as safety, right? Understanding that and saying we are all bound together, we will all sink or swim together as humankind is the path forward, I think, in global health. But for that, I think we have a lot of work to do, the global north folks, because we've not internalized that. At least we haven't shown it in our actual practice. If we had shown it, we could have shown it during this crisis. We could have been terrific allies. We could have shared our vaccines. We could have shared the know-how. We could have done things so differently, and we didn't. And we've lost 21 million souls in this crisis. We still haven't learned the lesson. And whatever COVID taught us, we didn't learn it with monkeypox, did we? We repeatedly behave as we can just protect ourselves. And that thinking is absolutely disastrous, and it will also kill us with climate change. Nobody is safe from climate change. And yet we pretend as somehow we can wall ourselves and insulate ourselves with our money and privilege, and we will ride it out. How do you ride it out? Can you protect Boston alone from climate crisis? What does it even mean, right? At some point, we've got to wake up and understand that we are all together, right? And if we don't get it, we will fail with everything. And that's what's wrong with global health, that we somehow think a small set of people can be saved and protected, even if the vast majority are suffering. And if we can't change that, I don't know how we're going to make progress. Thank you so much.
Terrible weather to come. We'll go to online.
We all are. If you think you're not, then you're not in this world, right? How can you not? Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And I'm not at all minimizing what you're saying, right? And I did give you concrete ways you could have dealt with it, right? For example, you could have been a joint first author with your Indian collaborator, and nobody would be suffering because of that, right? And who the heck came up with these crazy regulations that you think that we cannot challenge that, right? Look at the people we've excluded, right? Like community members who've made vital contributions to the paper. Oh, they cannot be authors. Who made them, and why can't we unmake them, right? And don't think that I've not made similar mistakes. I cringe at some of the stuff that I've done. Okay, I'll give you an example, and I don't mind you checking up on this. My colleague and I, we both work on TB. We wrote a whole paper on stigma and TB. Paper submitted, BMJ Global Health, revisions almost ready to be accepted. And then suddenly I looked at her and said, oh crap. What do you and I know about stigma? We don't have a TB survivor on this paper. I mean, really, we are the elite of the elite, right? Do you think I understand TB stigma? Does Ram understand TB stigma? We work in TB for sure. We understand, we've done MDs, we've done PhDs or whatever. That gives us no understanding of stigma, does it? So what happens to people with lived experience? So I wrote to Shay, the editor of BMJ, says, Shay, we made a mistake. We want to pull this paper. We want to go back. We want to work with TB survivors and make sure they are part of the paper and genuinely incorporate them. He said, absolutely do it, submit it again. And then it got published with the TB survivor on it. And now I'm consistently including TB survivors on my paper. By traditional metric, they probably don't deserve authorship. But I'm insisting that they're on it because they have lived experience that nobody in my team has, right? So to me, there isn't anything about global health that you and I cannot challenge. So be brave in how you do things. And I do agree, your department should reward you for your allyship work, should reward me for my allyship work, right? There has to be a space in our promotion dossiers which says, I have done all this, which don't show up on my CV, but I've been a good citizen, right? So somewhere we need to be rewarded. But for that to happen, our bosses who belong to an older generation and probably approach global health with a very different lens from the equity lens that we bring in, that generation has to rethink what they're doing, or that generation will have to be replaced with younger people who are thinking differently. Good question. Great question. And I am asked this every time I give this talk. Firstly, you must watch that ridiculously impressive video by the Prime Minister of, is it Barbados, Mia Motley, the Black woman. She was asked the same thing. And she said, what makes you think that corruption is unique to the global South? Right? In fact, when I was sitting in Nairobi on that panel, Africans were discussing among themselves in that auditorium on how they should get their act together. But then these are not two mutually exclusive issues. the global South, North-South dynamic has to change. But that doesn't mean Nigeria shouldn't do better internally, right? That doesn't mean Peruvian people will have to fight corruption themselves, right? Nigerians tried to do it this elections and they failed, right? Sadly for them, but they tried. That internal solution genuinely lies within Peru, right? Peruvian people have to stand up and say, this is not acceptable to us. But it's dangerous to say, Peru is more corrupt than America. That is what happens typically. Oh, we will give the money to an American group because the Peruvian group is corrupt. If there was no corruption in this country, explain to me the gun violence in this country. If every politician here is bought off by the gun lobby, when will this country control guns? Is that not corruption? You may not call it that. You may call it lobbying. End of the day, even a child could tell you that it's problematic to take money from the gun lobby and not do anything about it, right? That is corruption. So to me, I've always cringed when somebody says, oh, India is corrupt, right? Sure, but tell me what's not happening here. What's happening in the UK right now, right? What's happened in this country? So let's be humble about this. But yes, you have to fight the battle internally in each place to deal with it, which I don't think we can parachute and solve corruption from somewhere else, right? And people are trying. They're genuinely trying. Look at Brazil. They fought the election of their lives to get back the democracy, right? Each country will have to deal with that battle, and we can't do it from here.
I'll.
No, none of this is comfortable for anyone, right? And there is a lot of pushback against this. Have you seen all the pushback against DEI initiatives now? Right? It's like, yeah, enough of this woke stuff, right? And so it doesn't take long to flip the switch back and in fact, go the opposite direction. They've actually banned DEI in some states in this country, and it can happen anywhere. All the time. But I will tell you, this is where privilege comes in a big way. As a male full professor who's tenured, there's nothing much anybody can do to me at this point in my life. That is not your case, or that's not, your colleague's case. So I'm not saying all of you will be able to fight these battles at the same level. I'm asking more established men like me to stand up because they have so little to lose, right? If I already have 50 awards on my wall, do I need a 55th one, right? But that's the group that is doing the least because they're so used to sitting on power that their daily job is to accumulate more power, right? That is, to me, the saddest part of global health, that the most established senior people will not do anything to buck the system. Very few do. Well, they could be the ones to take chances, right? Because they're so built, their entire careers have been built on this system of privilege, right? So it's not something. Why would you challenge yourself? There's no reason to, right? Right.
apologize to everyone online, but I think we would probably have to close after that.
Yeah, go ahead, Honorine. You're on mute.
Thank you for that amazing talk, Dr. Pai. It was really, really eye-opening, even for me as a double agent. So we have students from Tufts, medical and public health students, going to the Global South for global health rotations. What practical advice would you give to them to practice allyship?
Beautiful question, Honorine. There's a lot of stuff written about the potential harms of short-term mission type of global health. And I think there's some good material that they can read and go. When I was a director of global health at McGill, we said nobody goes anywhere until you do the pre-departure training. So we have a structured pre-departure training. You might have it too. Within that, there's a lot of stuff on cultural humility, things that you should not do, right? There's a lot of do not do. And generally, I found that most students are quite happy to follow that. And when I was at Vellore, we constantly had American and British students come and stay with us. By and large, I found most of them to be very thoughtful and humble. So I think it's possible to do a good job. But I think the biggest lesson is when you're going somewhere, you're the biggest beneficiary, not the place you're going, right? You are benefiting from it. This is your privilege showing. You approach this entire trip with great humility. Just observe and come back, right? And don't do any harm. Don't do anything that you won't do back home, right?
Exactly.
At a minimum is what's required. And I do find most of them are quite fine that way.
Thank you.
Well, I think, and apologies to all 11 questions plus in the chat. So, and Madhu might be able to answer some of these right before we leave. But I just want to, from the perspective of time, bring this to a close and say thank you to everyone. April, I believe it's 12th or 14th. I have to check the date again, but it will be our next global health seminar on a structural approach to Palestinian health. So stay tuned and please join us for that discussion, which I think is going to be a very important one. And thank you very much. I'll leave this on in case Madhu can answer some of these questions for another 5 minutes or so. Thank you.